Ross Ulbright, the mastermind behind the now infamous Silk Road website, was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 40 years in 2015, which his mother called a prolonged death sentence, given the fact he was only 31 years old at the time.
The secret world used by criminals to buy and sell drugs.
The biggest criminal trial in the history of the internet is over this morning, and so apparently is Ross Ulbricht's freedom.
So it's life in prison. That's what a judge handed down to Ross Ulbricht.
I've never heard of such a long sentence for something someone did with a computer, essentially.
A life sentence for running basically a Craigslist website.
Ross has now served 10 years for charges that included conspiracy to distribute, commit computer hacking, money laundering, running a criminal enterprise, and trafficking fraudulent documents. But on Tuesday of this week, Ross got his life back thanks to a full and unconditional pardon issued by President Trump on only his second day in office. Trump posted on Truth Social about the matter, saying, "I just called the mother of Ross William Ulbright to let her know that in honor of her and the libertarian movement, which supported me so strongly, it was my pleasure to have just signed a full and unconditional pardon of her son, Ross. The scum that worked to convict him were some of these same lunatics who were involved in the modern-day weaponization of government against me. He was given 2 life sentences plus 40 years. Ridiculous." If you follow politics even a little bit, this action might strike you as somewhat odd, given the fact that Trump has built his political brand on being tough on crime, and he's even explicitly advocated for expanding the death penalty to drug dealers.
The only way you're going to stop this is the death penalty for drug dealers.
So it's justified that this pardon and the overwhelmingly positive reaction to it by his base has left many scratching their heads. So what makes Ross different? We're going to dive into that today. First, I'm Hannah Cox. You're watching The Base Politics Show. Thanks for tuning into my channel where I bring you my politically homeless takes on politics and culture. Before we dive in, make sure you like this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you have not, and also hit that notification bell so you never miss one of my episodes. Politics frequently makes for strange bedfellows, especially considering the fact that few involved in politics these days operate ideologically or based on principles. So Ross's pardon has an unusual base of support comprised of people in the libertarian movement who have always opposed the war on drugs, but also comprised of people within the MAGA movement who typically stringently oppose anyone who sells drugs or even consumes them, people who want to lock up more people for nonviolent crimes, and people who adamantly support the war on drugs and even revving it up. A lot of critics have pointed out this hypocrisy and noted that Trump's law and order stance is less about the law and more about who he likes. And yes, that's true. I think we could point to countless examples of that. But it's fair to do that while also still celebrating that in this case, justice was served for one man and his family. What you need to know about the background that got us to this moment in time is that Ross had a mother whose name is Lynn, who was simply heroic. And I think that she was more of the front-facing advocate for him. It seems like a lot of his family was involved in the effort to elevate his case and seek a pardon, which was the only way that he was ever going to get out of jail, because he was given 2 life sentences plus 40 years without the possibility of parole. So he couldn't get out for good behavior. They couldn't decide he had served enough time. Like, it was a pardon or clemency or nothing. And so Lynn started traveling. She would move wherever Ross was currently being housed so that she could spend more time with him and visit him. And this is like cross-country moves we're talking about. And in her spare time, she started working the political circuit, attending conferences, speaking on his behalf, and advocating for people to join her in her efforts to get his sentence overturned. I had heard of the Free Ross movement for a couple of years, but it really had not gotten my attention in the same way some more high-level cases like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden had. I had been given some false information about his case that inclined me to think he was less deserving of a pardon until I met his mom. I think I met her about 2 years ago in Miami at a Students for Liberty conference, and we were backstage in the green room together. I think she was going on to speak after me. She was absolutely lovely. I got to hear right from her about what actually happened in the case, the problems with it, and it sent me down a rabbit hole where I realized a lot of what I had been told about this case was government propaganda and simply false, and that this guy was certainly deserving of mercy. Now, clearly, as she was going about and speaking to the country and attending political events, she started to gain a lot of footing within libertarian circles, which were an easy coalition base to target, given the beliefs of libertarians that crimes are an abomination and shouldn't be on the books to begin with, given the fact that libertarians are typically more principled when it comes to matters around the justice system. They understand that the government is always corrupt. They understand that there are frequently things that happen behind the scenes in many cases that put people in jail wrongfully. Like, they were just inherently attracted to this case and the arguments against his sentence. And you had the added benefit of the fact that Ross was apparently one of us, which libertarians don't have a lot of national figureheads to rally behind. Once they realized that Ross was into like Austrian econ, he considered himself an agorist. He was somebody who really did hold libertarian values. And he had even started the Silk Road Enterprise in part because of his views that the laws it circumvented were unjust. Like, it was sort of a way of fighting the system. And as you can see by this video, his entire case and his ideology resonated with many libertarians, me included. Number one, Trump has said that he would pardon him, so that's a very good indication. Number two, I think Trump has something to prove to a lot of people, because we did just see Biden pardon Julian Assange.
I trust Donald Trump in that sense. I mean, think about it. Both of those guys were prosecuted in the same court, right, in New York. And ultimately, you know, I pray for Ross's freedom. I certainly have a lot of hope in President Trump and his promise to free him.
With this promise, it's very easy. He signs a piece of paper on day one.
It's a great thing that he's made that commitment, and we 100% support him in the commitment that he has made for that.
Now, in the year leading up to the election, the leadership of the current Libertarian Party, which I must always emphasize is not the same as libertarians. There are a lot of libertarians, the vast majority of them do not participate in the LP, that is me included, but the leadership within the LP decided that they would essentially try to broker a deal with Trump, promising to move the support of the base of the LP away from their own candidate and to put it behind Trump, which Trump was very interested in, given the fact that he had made previous statements about how he believed the libertarian vote had cost him the election in 2020. And so in order to attract more libertarians to support him, given the fact that he doesn't really have that strong of a libertarian platform, he met with the LP's leadership. And one thing that they put on the table in order for them to support him was freeing Ross on day one of his presidency.
Now I think you should nominate me, or at least vote for me, and we should win together. You heard those words. Nominate me or vote. Vote for me. Because the libertarians want to vote for me, and most of them will. And it's very important.
Now, obviously, this deal lost the Libertarian Party a lot. They've lost 50 ballot access because they didn't maintain the votes they needed in order to keep getting on the ballot in coming elections. They've lost a lot of donor support. They've lost a lot of people who are more principled libertarians and weren't willing to compromise and sell out all of the other principles they believe in and policies they believe in and support somebody who is actively working against them just to free one man. This was a huge dispute amongst people in the libertarian movement and the LP, which really shouldn't surprise you because the main thing libertarians do is fight with one another online. Personally, I'm not jumping on a Trump or even a GOP bandwagon because he did one good thing for one person, especially given the fact that he is actively working to increase the same laws and often to entrench the system that unjustly put Ross in prison in the first place. But unlike many on the left, I apparently am still able to applaud this one action. It's really weird watching Democrats who tend to be more aligned with me and my views on the criminal justice system go in the other direction and actually criticize Trump for this pardon. These were just some of the comments I saw in response to me online or posting about the case in general. This guy said, "I hope Ross goes straight back into aiding the spread of fentanyl and Class A drugs throughout the US. What a hero." Isaac Saul, who's an independent journalist I really like, but I think he's wrong on this one, said, "Ross Ulbright literally helped launch a website that facilitated the sale of heroin, human trafficking, fake passports, and guns. He also tried to hire a hitman to kill someone. Trump doing this is the ultimate hypocrisy in his alleged fight against human trafficking and illegal immigration, and MAGA supporting it is totally bonkers to me. Worst of all, he's doing it transparently for the crypto grift." The crypto grift in this case was definitely the government and the agents who prosecuted Ross in the first place, but I'll circle back to that in a minute. Isaac typically gets it right on a lot, but he apparently didn't fact check himself very well before popping off on this matter, because Ross did not try to kill people. This has been debunked, and I'll also get into the weeds on that in a minute. But this is very typical of the pushback I'm seeing from people, particularly from the center to the left on this case. And it's just very confusing because the left allegedly, even 4 years ago, was very opposed to the war on, was opposed to putting people in prison for participating in it, whether it be on the buying or selling side. And typically, people on the left have advocated for less harsh criminal sentences, which you cannot argue in any way in this case were not extreme. Okay, even people who supported Ross going to jail will concede the fact that the sentence he got handed for the charges that were actually on the books it's insane. Like, it's completely out of line with typical sentencing protocols you would see in similar cases. Isaac followed up that tweet by saying, if you think Silk Road didn't kill people, you're out of your mind. I personally know people who died of overdoses from drugs they bought on Silk Road. He's probably responsible for more death and harm than most people on death row. And I think this is a completely bogus talking point. Somebody selling drugs is not responsible for somebody choosing to consume them or overconsume them or dying from them. People have autonomy. Adults have the ability to choose what's good or bad for them. We don't use the same mentality towards people who own liquor stores and who sell alcohol to adults, even though alcohol leads to a lot of deaths in the US, probably more than if you really look at all of the diseases that it causes. And we don't do that because we recognize that the individual is responsible for their choices and they are expected to live with the consequences of those choices even when they are negative. That's what we do in a free country. This talking point is just very nanny state. It's patronizing. And again, it's completely out of step with where people usually are on the left. Here's another comment from Dim Saints that says, did she, meaning Lynn, mention the time Ross tried to hire a hitman to his own employee? Did she mention Preston Bridge, the 16-year-old boy who died from the drugs he bought on Ross's site? Again, same kind of mentality. And I must emphasize, until I'm blue in the face, this whole point that the left is running with, that Ross tried to hire a hitman, is completely hogwash. What you need to know is that the case against Ross was corrupt from top to bottom. As I and others have pointed out, what Ross was doing is not an apples to apples comparison when you look at a typical dealer. Instead, it's more like he was operating a Craigslist type website. And yes, the website was meant to allow people to make transactions outside of the government's infrastructure of laws and using cryptocurrency so that their transactions could not be traced. So obviously, such a website did attract criminal activity, but that's not the same thing as Ross going on the website and selling drugs himself. The government went after him and him alone because of the money that was going down on this website. They wanted to get their hands on it. I mean, just look at these numbers that they access thanks to civil asset forfeiture, which is a corrupt practice that shouldn't even be allowed in this country. But in October of 2013, following Ross's arrest, the FBI confiscated approximately 144,000 Bitcoins from his laptop. At that time, these Bitcoins were valued at $28.5 million, which they later auctioned off in 2014 and 2015. In November of 2020, authorities seized over 69,370 Bitcoins, then worth more than $1 billion, from individual identified as Individual X, who had unlawfully acquired the cryptocurrency from Silk Road. In March of 2023, the U.S. government sold 9,861 Bitcoins, netting over $215 million. This sale was part of the liquidation of the Bitcoins seized in November of 2020. And in January of 2025, a U.S. court authorized the sale of an additional 69,370 Bitcoins valued at approximately $6.5 billion, which had been seized from Silk Road related cases. And as these publications note, the seizures and the subsequent sales represent some of the largest cryptocurrency confiscations in U.S. history, reflecting the significant financial scale of the Silk Road marketplace. There are lots of websites that have illegal activity happening on them. Typically, the government goes after the people who are committing the illegal activity on those websites, which is how law and order should work. That's a big part of Section 230, even though that pertains more to speech. But people who own and operate websites are not responsible for things that people say or do on them. They shouldn't be. That's not how liability works. As this person pointed out, they gave Ross Ulbricht 2 life sentences for creating a website that other people used for illegal activity, but they don't go after the creators of websites that knowingly show child porn, rape, other sexual assault, and human trafficking. Got it. Great job, government. They went after Ross because of the money, plain and simple. And not only were their motivations in targeting him completely sus, so was the actual investigation. So much so that 2 federal agents, Carl Force and Sean Bridges, were convicted of stealing Bitcoin during the Silk Road investigation. Those agents were later sentenced for extortion, money laundering, and obstruction related to their investigation. So obviously the corruption here raises pretty serious concerns about the integrity of the entire operation, particularly considering the fact that these guys had access to administrative privileges on Silk Road, which would have allowed them to fabricate or alter evidence. It's not hard to know these things, okay? I'm really kind of shocked at the people who pop off about cases like this without doing even just like the smallest margin of research into the matter. Not only were the agents corrupt, not only did they have access to the website where they could have altered information, much of the prosecution's case actually relied on digital communications that could have been manipulated by those corrupt agents, okay? The defense actually argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that the government's control over Silk Road servers introduced opportunities for tampering. So when people come in and try to say that Ross was caught trying to hire hits on people online, the first question should be like, what proof do you have of that? You just have some screenshots that were provided to you by agents who were embezzling money from the entire investigation and had access to the website and administrative procedures on it, and clearly could have posed as him or altered those digital communications. And you want to know secondarily why I know that this didn't happen? Because the government didn't even try to allege that it happened in court. Like, I don't know if these people missed this part, but when I read through the charges he was convicted on, one thing that was conspicuously missing was hiring a hitman to kill people. As Clark Neely from the Cato Institute pointed out, if one of your concerns about the Ross Ulbricht pardon is that he supposedly solicited hire, has it ever occurred to you to wonder why the Department of Justice never charged him with that crime? Like, be so serious. It is utterly ridiculous to regurgitate this crap. You are a prime target for government propaganda if you can fall for something like that. On top of all of these problems with Ross's case is the fact that the sentence was absolutely insane. It was completely outside the bounds of what you would normally see for similar crimes. And the judge in this case seems to have particularly had it out for him. In fact, if you read the transcripts in the case, she consistently mentions Ross's privilege, which many have taken to be a hint at her belief that because he was white, he should be sentenced more harshly in this case. I can't say that for sure because she doesn't spell it out, but it does lead you to wonder what else she could mean by his privilege. And this language is littered throughout the transcript, but here's just one example. She said, there appears to be, in some of these articles that were presented to the court, some view that there is a moral ambiguity about some of the drug distribution. There is no moral ambiguity about it. It was just wrong. And that is what our democratic process has said. And there is a way to change the law, but it is not by doing what occurred. No dealer from the Bronx selling meth or heroin or crack has ever made these kinds of arguments to the court. It is a privileged argument. It is an argument from one of privilege. Now, her comparison to dealers and the Bronx does lead me to think that it has racial overtones. But regardless, I think it's very apparent that this judge acted inappropriately and doled out a sentence that should have been laughed out of court. Personally, I think there is moral ambiguity in this matter. I think that taking a person's life away from them and putting them in a cell for the quote crime of doing something that doesn't harm anybody else but themselves is more unethical than a person choosing to use drugs or a person meeting that demand by selling them, or a person offering a website by which people can make that exchange without violence. It must be noted that this is the kind of infrastructure that could and should exist if we didn't have the war on drugs. It would actually undercut the cartel, that would lead to safer exchanges, both when it comes to terms of the people interacting, but also when it comes to the safety of the product. I think the war on drugs has single-handedly done more to undermine the liberties of Americans. It has had far-reaching implications. It has really been more of a Trojan horse used to undermine our Bill of Rights. That is what it is actually about, that and the money that they make off of it, because they make substantial money off of it. It's not about keeping people safe. It's not about protecting people from themselves, because they do far more punitive and damaging things to people than they do to themselves with their repercussions for using drugs versus the person just using a product. And in the long run, by having the war on drugs, they create a black market. They empower and embolden criminals and cartels. They put everybody in more danger. The entire thing is disgusting and should be done away with. Ultimately, I'm very happy for Ross, for his family, and especially for his mother, Lynn. But justice shouldn't require an entire movement making your case a national story, or political parties handing over their entire platform just to get one person out of prison. Obviously, a lot of work needs to be done to fix that system, and I'm hopeful with Ross now free that he'll work to do just that. All right, guys, I hope you liked this episode. Make sure to like the video. Please subscribe if you have not, and if you want even more content, you can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, or Instagram.